Hey, everybody, good morning. Got a few updates for you today on military spend for 2024. Recently, SIPRI, the Stockholm Institute for Peace, one of the best research centers for military data, military sales, military budgets, military spending. They do a great job aggregating this for the world. They released their 2024 data, so I wanted to put that together and give an update on, at least how I see things in my database. Limited Bitcoin talk today. I know people usually like the Bitcoin talk, but Bitcoin is always part of the macro picture. Although, as I've said, I do think the power curve is the most important thing in the growth of Bitcoin at the moment, showing the growth of the network adoption. And it's certainly, in my opinion, as everybody knows, going to be a big help to the volatility that's going to come. But I want to keep it a little bit more macro today because a lot of things are happening. Ukraine continues to fight on. Donald Trump may be changing his tune on the attitude towards Ukraine, or at least allowing the Congress to finally fight against Putin's aggression, as Europe is doing. I'll talk about some of that in a second. But yeah, a really tough weekend for Ukraine. Massive hundreds of amounts of Shahed drones every night. So again, I don't know why people think that this can be an isolated war when Ukraine is fighting North Korean troops, Chinese kit, and Iranian drones every night. But I'm going to put up some charts here where we can break down a few economic things here. So this is GDP as of 2024, more or less accurate. IMF data is relatively recent here. I take it from the World Bank, from the UN as well. And I'm trying to get a way to show you a lot of the information that I want to talk about in one chart. So I think this starburst chart is pretty good. We have different regions of the world here. I don't know why these aren't exactly showing up, but what we have here is Latin America and the Caribbean. Though there's not necessarily cultural ties between the Caribbean and Latin America. I see them grouped together a lot. So we'll dig into that. Of course, we have Middle East and North Africa as well. Is a common grouping. But I want to go through a few things here, and it's not just GDP. We'll look at military spend, as I talked about, and also debt, government debt. And we'll see the differences in these pie charts and what conclusions we can draw from it. So if you group Mexico into this Latin America and Caribbean group, it goes down there. So then you have North America just remaining United States and Canada. Trump's coveted 51st state. But as we see here, United States is obviously the elephant in that room. Number one in world GDP, over a quarter of world GDP share. 29 trillion or so is the number. That may be revised still, but that's what we have. And then if you put things in per capita, I've gone back over the last 20 years, which I think is helpful. And this will be helpful when we gauge how other countries are doing. Okay, so 86,000 is a great GDP per capita. I would use that more than actually any other figure if you want to target a salary in said country. I would use this, not what they say average wages are or minimum wage, because this is literally GDP. GDP is the full aggregate final new goods and services that a nation produces over the course of a calendar year. So if you're a contributing member of society, I would think you would at least want to get this as far as your income. $86,000, 2024. 10 years ago, 55,000. And 20 years ago, less than half, 41,000 Let's just look at Canada really quick. If you look at the GDP per capita, quite a bit lower than the United States. There's a lot of things going on there, of course, with the dollar. People want the dollar. They want to hold dollars for the moment still. So Canada's GDP per capita is still quite a bit lower than the United States. Obviously, a way smaller nation than the United States, a tenth of the size, and only a $2.2 trillion economy, although that still puts them number 9th in the world. All right, so the 80-20 rule is going to apply for all of these charts. Next one up, of course, is China. Let's go in. So number 2 economy in the world at the moment. Remember, this is nominal GDP. I'm not doing purchasing power parity, which people said China is already passing the United States. This is still raw power, raw figures. $18 trillion economy. Number 2 in the world, 16% of world share, but way smaller. Obviously, in GDP per capita, $13,000 roughly. But look at that increase over 20 years. Okay, so where the United States is a little bit more than doubled GDP per capita, China is up tenfold. Not quite tenfold, but up significantly. Okay, 9, 10x from 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, the world was going gangbusters, ready to sell and import from anything they could to or from China. Japan, still the number 4th. World's 4th largest economy, $4 trillion economy. They have a lot of debt, which we'll talk about, but still it is a major player. And another interesting thing about Japan is that $30,000 figure, it's stagnant to even down from 20 years ago. As you see, $32,000 per capita. Okay, so if you looked at this in yen, it would be up. But the yen has lost power against the dollar relatively, and it's been printed extremely since the 1990s. I've talked about this a lot. So this is a wild, this is really the most wild economy when you look at breakdown numbers these way. Yes, I understand that yen can go up and your salary can go up in yen. And if you're relatively isolated in the Japanese economy, maybe you're okay. Maybe. Although they always talk about how there's, no room in Japan and always trying to economize and build smaller and smaller apartments, so on and so forth in the cities. But it's actually down. GDP per capita is down, right? Then we have Korea, 12th largest. Taiwan right there, 22nd largest economy in the crosshairs of China at the moment. Relatively same size as Japan as far as GDP per capita, $33,000. Okay. Hong Kong, pretty much completely enveloped by China right now. Of course, they're still technically a separate economic zone, but the people that were protesting for their human rights in Hong Kong 5 years ago, right on the onset of COVID, as far as I understand, they're all still in jail. So people can enlighten me on that if there's anything that they know different. But it's a really trying time for a lot of economies that are on the border of larger economies that don't respect human rights. We're going to have to keep dealing with this. All right, now Europe. One thing I want to say about Europe very quickly is you see this distribution here. You see the largest countries. Whoops, something got a little frozen there. If you looked at the United States, this would look roughly the same. Okay, you'd have this breakdown. You'd have, California, Texas here, New York, Florida, and then you'd quickly fall into, the mid-tier and the smaller states. So the 80-20 rule is ubiquitous when you look at these things. Germany, still one of the largest economies in the world after US and China, but only 4% of the output, $4.7 trillion. Growth has not been as fast as the United States. $55,000 GDP per capita in 2024 compared with $35,000 20 years ago, so not quite double, a little bit slower growth in the United States. United Kingdom, much slower growth, all right, a little bit richer, $52,000, but 20 years ago it was $40,000. Okay. And obviously, we're looking at this as dollars. There's no numeraire that we can really use except for the dollar. So you do have currency risk to look at in these things that do affect each economy. But by and large, the numeraire still to use is the dollar. I'm not going to go through every one, but I want to just give you a flavor of how these things look. All right. France, seventh largest economy in the world, 2.9% share of the world economy, 48,000. And also, they haven't doubled in the last 20 years. Okay. But if you go to some of these smaller countries, and Poland is a very interesting one. All right. Poland did not have a recession in 2008, 2009. One of the few countries in the world that did not shrink after the global financial crisis. 21st largest economy in the world. That puts them 0.79% share of the output, $860 billion worth of GDP. Look at their increase now. Okay, 23,000, still half the size of the UK or France. Again, this is just a share of output. It's not necessarily average wages, but I think it's a better way to look at it. $23,000 GDP per capita. 20 years ago, they're 4 times smaller, or 25% the size. It's a 4x growth, roughly speaking, right? I'm rounding, of course. A little bit less than 4x growth over 20 years. So that's the fastest growth we've seen thus far. Go to other economies, Sweden, rich economy, slow, burly, overregulated. 24th largest economy in the world. Still pretty rich. Ireland, this one is wild. This is one of the shortfalls of GDP, is that Ireland had some great tax structures, which Europe is trying to close now for countries, for companies coming in. Look at that GDP per capita for Ireland, 103,000. That is because you have some major players, Apple, Google, Facebook, Dropbox, that came into Ireland specifically for tax breaks in Europe. That helped. But that's not exactly an even distribution of, and none of this, of course, is an even distribution, but is not exactly indicative of what the average person is making. But, you lower taxes, companies will come in. So that 103,000 represents the share or the output of all the revenue of the companies in Ireland combined. And it's pretty huge. But it's not indicative of average salaries, all right, in this case. All right. I want to get down to some more Eastern European countries. Poland was the first one that we saw. Okay, now let's look at Romania. Huge growth for Romania. Romania came in with Bulgaria into the EU in 2008, 4 years after the big accession, which was the Baltics were in there, Poland, Slovakia, Czechia. I guess we're saying Czechia now. We're not saying Czech Republic, but Czechia. Romania was a little bit late, but still, look at that growth. All right. I'm very glad that they saved the far right, hard right, Putin right candidates from winning their recent presidential election. Don't know much about their local politics other than that, but I'm happy about that. Huge growth. Coming into the European Union was very, very good for Romania, a former Soviet sphere of influence country, former Iron Curtain country, up, 6x over 20 years in GDP per capita. Let's look at the Czech Republic, or Czechia. A bit richer 20 years ago, so only up, a little bit less than 3x. You see that? I'm looking at the 11,000 20 years ago GDP per capita, now 31,000 today. But still, you'll notice the trend. All of Eastern Europe has grown a lot faster than Western Europe, as you would expect. Okay, well, Western Europe maybe doubles, not even doubles in the GDP per capita. But Romania, Poland, they're just flying. Now, of course, we get to Czechia here. not as fast, but still pretty fast. Finland's actually smaller than Czech Republic, which is wild. Portugal, $300 billion economy. Look at their GDP per capita. I mean, it's lower than Czechia, than the Czech Republic. Greece, struggling. I mean, Greece has been in the news for 20 years now and being an over-leveraged, underperforming economy, except for tourism and shipping. It's interesting to see. There, from 2004 to 2014, they had a lower GDP per capita and barely higher now. 2024, 24,000. This one I want to point out. All right, so Hungary, good people, been there. Budapest is a marvelous city. Not a large economy, $200 billion economy, small, mid-range for Europe. But look at the growth here. Okay, from 2014 to 2024, it's grown by 50% over 10 years. Okay, so it might seem like it's decent. A little bit more than doubled over 10 years. But this is an Iron Curtain country. So whereas Czechia or Czech Republic is 3x, Romania 5, 6x, Poland 4, 5x. All right, I'm looking at the GDP per capita figures there from 2004 to 2014. Major growth in all these countries. Questions should be asked why Hungary, which is not. They're basically, Orban is a dictator for 15 years. Everybody knows that by now, but it's been 15 years now. Orban has been in office. This country is the template for Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation in the United States. It's not great growth per capita. All right, so when you steal things from your people, growth is less. And 23,000 is not great for a country like Hungary, which used to be a former pretty big power in Europe, good traditions, united with Austria famously before World War I. It's the most corrupt in Europe, and it's the slowest growth in Europe. We have Ukraine now, outside of the EU, way poor, and even the growth of Ukraine is stronger than the growth of Hungary. All right, if you look over the last 20 years, look at that GDP per capita. It was $1,300 only in 2004. Now it's $5,500. All right, people working hard there, low salaries, major hangover of corruption and Russian influence, and they're trying to break free of it continually. These people are heroes to me, and wait till you see how their share of the pie looks for military spend. All right. I'm going to show you my neck of the woods here. Obviously, we've got some small countries output-wise. Remember, the size of these slices is the size of the output in totality. So you got Luxembourg, huge GDP per capita, huge rich company. Same thing as the Ireland effect. There's a lot of companies that go into Luxembourg for tax-free reasons. $135,000 per GDP per capita in 2024. That's almost double 20 years ago. Only a $90 billion economy, though. All right, now we get to my neck of the woods. We got Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. All right, the Baltics here. Lithuania to start, a little bit bigger than Serbia, barely. $82 billion economy, 79th in the world. Again, look at the GDP per capita. Low, certainly low, compared to Germany, UK, France, only 28,000. But compared to Hungary, the Lits have grown, again, 4 or 5 times in the last 20 years. Let's look at the Lats. Smaller economy than Belarus, dictatorial nation, last dictator of Europe, which really is not the last, it's just the oldest. Lukashenko, potato man from 1994, $73 billion economy. Latvia, even smaller, $45 billion, 97th in the world. All right, that's where my family's from. Still, same effect as Lithuania. 3, 4, 5 times the growth, GDP per capita, over the last 20 years. Right? 4 to 5, I should say, 4 to 5 times. Estonia, the same, 4, 3 to 4. And Estonia is the richest of the Baltics, you see, 31,000 per capita. All right. Famously, the most digital economy in the world. Started doing this stuff in the 90s, in 94, 95. They knew that this was the best way to preserve the state, to preserve the nation, was digitally and online, using zero-knowledge proofs and things way ahead of anybody in the blockchain industry. But these are pretty small economies that are on the border of the old Russian Empire, which is belligerent beyond control today. So we're going to go into military spend here in a second, but obviously these are 3 big blocks here: North America, China or East Asia, which includes Japan, and Europe. Let's go to the Latin American and Caribbean really quick. Okay, Brazil, largest. My old buddy Fernando's home state, $2 trillion economy, 10th in the world. Not very friendly to the United States. Still, big growth. 3x GDP per capita over the last 20 years. And, this is why people invest into emerging markets. But I want to caution again, think about Hungary. Think about Hungary. A little over 2x growth over the last 20 years and 23,000 GDP per capita. It's not a good sign. When you're corrupt, when the rule of law doesn't exist, when everybody knows that the parliament and the judiciary is basically a rubber stamp of a dictator, you got problems. All right, so I don't really want to go through all of these. This is not my neck of the woods. Argentina, famously, through my monetary base research, has gone through 5, 6 currencies in the last 50 years. We'll see if Malay can change that. GDP per capita is down from 10 years ago at only 12,000. Certainly going to be interesting to see how much they can pick up here during Malay's term. They can't really go much lower than where they've been. Venezuela is actually higher than I thought here. So this is Banana Republic style at the moment. Used to be one of the richest in the world. Still a $100 billion economy, oil economy. GDP per capita the same as it was 20 years ago. All right. Dominican, largest Caribbean island, Caribbean nation, although still, of course, Latin. But in this subset, they're the largest, just in case you're curious. Ecuador, dollarized economy. They don't even use their own currency. All right, Middle East and North Africa. Let's break into this. Turkey, just like we don't call it Czech Republic, I guess, anymore. We call it Czechia. Now we call it Turkey. Not the old Americanized Turkey. Largest economy here, but we're only at 1.3 trillion. So this block of countries is pretty different, right? 1.1 trillion for Saudi Arabia, obviously, oil and gas economy. Emirates, and then Israel. $500 billion economy, 31st in the world, and over double what its people had 20 years ago as far as output. It's a pretty modernized nation. Turkey, good triple, even though now they have an autocrat like Orban. Erdogan has done 50% more of the progress of Orban over the last 20 years, where he's gone up 3x on his economy and Orban's only gone up 2x. Although, of course, they're starting from a lower base. They're poor per capita. Iran's still a big economy, although completely shut down from the rest of the world. $5,000 per capita, 37th in the world, $400 billion economy. All right. India, obviously one of the biggest nations in the world. I think the biggest. I'm having trouble finding the Southeast Asia here. Subcontinent. $3.9 trillion economy, number 5th in the world, 3.5% of the share of global GDP. Look at that GDP per capita. Smaller than China's, smaller than anybody's we've looked at so far. $2,700 per person. That is still up 5x over 20 years. Bangladesh, larger than Pakistan. Pakistan and India obviously don't like each other. We've had some skirmishes here. Skirmishes is not the right word, probably, over the last couple weeks. Same thing. Even, half the size as far as GDP per capita of India. So a lot of room to grow here. Certainly a lot of geopolitical turmoil. Southeast Asia, really quick just to show you Indonesia. A lot of investors have liked Indonesia over the last 10 years. Singapore, pretty rich country, 89,000 GDP per capita, $500 billion economy compared to Thailand, 7,500 GDP per capita. You look at Vietnam, communist still, 4,600. An amazing story. I mean, we Americans, I should say, had the most brutal of experiences and fights against the Vietnamese, and somehow they like Americans for now, even though they're getting tariffed pretty hard. See how that relationship continues. They like Americans. Lost the war, but somehow won the peace, as Stephen Kotkin says with Vietnam. Now Russia. Put them in the bucket of Central Asia, or actually, sorry, North Asia. Russia is the only North Asian country. Of course, historically, they like to consider themselves European or European but different, European but better. But obviously, the continent is almost entirely in Asia. So the North, I'm calling them North Asia, as I think the UN does. And we have Central Asia. We have Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. There's maybe a couple others that aren't even showing up with GDP here. $2 trillion economy, 11th largest economy in the world. Very centralized, very corrupt. Even Russia has done better than Orban's done. 3x over the last 20 years. All right, so $15,000 per person. GDP per capita. That's 3x of 20 years ago. So Putin's done even better than Orban as far as a growth in GDP per capita. Something to think about if you're from Hungary. Oceania, it's mostly Australia, New Zealand, a bunch of islands, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Micronesia, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu. Overall, Australia number 14 in the world. And then the last one, unbelievable to look at it this way, Sub-Saharan Africa. 400 billion. South Africa is number 40 in the world, and it's just quite incredible. Nigeria, one of the biggest African economies, biggest African currency even, I believe. I'm trying to remember. Sometimes the South African rand is bigger, but not always. The Naira is a pretty competitive currency for Africa. But it is unbelievable now. You're looking at GDPs per capita in the $1,000, $2,000 range. Uganda, 1,000. It's pretty remarkable how behind Africa is. And I'm not going to pretend I have all the explanations for why and how it is. But if you look at the share of Sub-Saharan Africa, the entire share, 1.8 $1.8 trillion. All right, that's less than 2% of GDP. World GDP is something like, let me find it, $109 trillion for 2024. So, 1 to 1.5%. Sub-Saharan Africa. All right, so this is a full lay of the land of the world of GDP. Now, for a more interesting thing, let's look at this same starburst chart. And by the way, I do this on Flourish, so it's free. This is not my chart engine as I typically do. So if you guys want to, if you want help with this, or just look at Flourish and look at the charts there, it's free. Great to draw. It's not my own charting engine, but anyway, gross domestic product. Now let's look at CIPRI's data for military expenditure for 2024. All right, GDP, military, GDP, military. A couple things just to point off the bat. Europe, as we can see, was larger than East Asia, which East Asia was larger economically in GDP. Now it's Europe is larger by a hair. And the Middle East is punching above its weight, and Russia is punching above its weight economically. All right. I'm not going to go through every one, but I do want to show you again because I'm constantly worried about more war in Europe in light of Putin's aggression here. America is going to continue to grow. Hopefully everybody can grow more intelligently here when it comes to military and defense, and not belligerently like some nations. But $1 trillion budget for the United States military, all right, about the size of the interest payments on the debt. Number one in the world, 37% share. Okay, so well bigger than the quarter share that it was for GDP. 37% share of the world. Also here I have in the tooltips here, I have same 20-year gaps, but now looking at the percent of GDP that the military spend represents. You'll remember this, there's a famous figure, which is really just the guidance of NATO, which is 2% of GDP, 2%. And, that's going to grow here in the coming years because of the war in Ukraine. All right, so let's break into Europe here. I want to show you some things. Now look at this. You notice anything different here from GDP? Whereas Ukraine was just a small sliver in this with GDP. $5,000 GDP per capita. Now, in 2024, numbers came in. This is actually lower than I thought it would be. Only $65 billion in military spend. I'm not going to try to audit this or vet this. I thought this would be higher. But reported as $65 billion on their military. That's number 8 in the world. Country at war, defending themselves, defending their sovereignty alone. Of course, they have military and financial assistance from many countries around the world, thank God. But they are facing an envious, maniacal autocrat by themselves. 35% military spend per GDP. Look at 10 years ago, all right, on the outbreak of the seizing of Crimea and the first Russian invasion in 2014, the Russian spring of 2014 after the Sochi Olympics, only 3%. All right, 2.6% in 2004. And again, Ukraine was given the assurance of the UK, the US, France, and Russia that their territorial borders would remain sovereign in 1994 for giving up their nukes. A mistake you can be sure they will never make again, as well as many other countries, Poland as well. It's probably going to be getting nukes at some point soon, even though they're not going to announce it until it happens. Poland, huge jumps as well. Okay, Poland, the economy was not a ton smaller, was still in this top half, top three quarters even of Europe GDP, but even punching more above their weight as far as military spend goes. $38 billion there for Poland, 4.4% of GDP in 2024. All right, and really around the 2% threshold always. Of course, another big X factor here is Germany. All right, this $88 billion is like $20 billion higher than 2023. Last week in Lithuania, Friedrich Merz, the new German chancellor, came to Lithuania for a ceremony to install a full brigade. They've had battalions, which it's called a permanent brigade now in Lithuania to deter Russia, of up to 5,000 troops. They have had battalions since 2014 and the invasion of Crimea, but smaller. And I guess if you use the correct lexicon, it was not permanent troops staying in Lithuania, but they're going to be permanent now. And they're invited in. You can imagine the change. The Baltics invaded by the Nazis in 1941 after being invaded by the Soviets in 1940. You can imagine the change where the Baltics are actually inviting the Germans in for protection. It's just a completely wild time in the world, and Germany is now the biggest military spender in Europe, the biggest economy in Europe. Now it is the biggest military spender in Europe, and invited in to Lithuania for deterrence against the mad, crazy, dictatorial, maniacal Putin. This country, as well as the United States and one other, is the only country, or are the only countries that have kept the 2% spend to GDP. Right? You can see there 20 years ago, they were 2.5% of GDP, 2024, 2.3, 2014, 2.2. Number 6 in the world, this $81 billion of military spend, still probably a shell of itself in the former dominance that it had with the Royal Navy in the British Empire days. But they have at least contributed to NATO and defense as the United States has. The only other country, you might be surprised, I've talked about this before, that consistently has made the 2% threshold wasn't the Netherlands, wasn't Sweden. Sweden just got into NATO. It wasn't Norway, it wasn't Denmark. Romania, got in recently. It wasn't Belgium. Look at that coming up. Greece. Surprise, perhaps, right? Because Greece is had pretty dismal, terrible performances economically in Europe over the last 20 years. But they are the largest percentage-wise spender consistently, along with the UK and the US. 3.2% last year, 2.6% in 2004. All right. Of course, that is precisely because of their NATO ally, Turkey. But that's a pretty wild thing to consider. I want to go to the Baltics again. I want to go to my neck of the woods. Hungary did actually make the 2% last year, 0.9% 10 years ago. Okay. And to be fair, including the Baltics, many countries spent well less in these post-crisis years of 2009 to 2014. So Hungary is actually not at odds there. Portugal's never meeting the 2% threshold. Here we go, Lithuania. 3.2% of GDP in 2024. But again, a small spend, $2.6 billion. It's 57th in the world, 0.1% of the total share. You look at 10 years ago, only 0.9% as well. So again, this is a big factor. The financial crisis, the economies were completely gutted. And there was not much room to spend on defense. So that's something to keep in mind. We're going to find Latvia and Estonia here. Estonia has been pretty good at keeping close to 2%. Again, well over it last year, 3.3%, 1.7% in 2004, 1.9% 2014. Latvia was not keeping up in 2014, you see, 0.9%. But all these countries, all right, all these countries joined these Eastern European countries, except for, of course, Finland and Sweden, which joined in 2023, 2024 in NATO after Russia's invasion. All these countries have been in NATO since 2004, these Eastern European countries. Of course, not Belarus. I'm putting, this is just a Europe map here. Belarus is a very small spend, incapable of defending itself against Russia if they wanted to. It seems like they don't want to, or at least Lukashenko, Potato Man, is Russian troops are going to move forward. There's already Russian missiles moving forward in Belarus. They're going to move forward. Anyway, very small countries here, and some of them right on the border with Russia. So let's look at the Russian spend now. Here it is, Central North Asia, 150 billion total. All of that is Russia. Okay, $149 billion last year. That's number 3 in the world. So the Russian economy is quite a bit lower worldwide. $2 trillion economy. They're punching well above their weight and are going to continue doing so. Let's look at Middle East and North Africa. 200 billion total. Saudi Arabia is a massive spender on its own defense. Obviously in alliance with the United States since the 70s. Look at those percentages, 10%, 7% of GDP. Huge portions of the economy are allocated to military and to defense. $80 billion. Israel next up, $46 billion. Also huge portions. 8.8% last year. That's up from 5.6% in 2014. Turkey, NATO member. NATO member since the 50s, is up next here. They spend a lot as well, not as much as Greece. Their rival, let's say, for centuries, millennia, depending on how you define Turkey and Greece. 25 billion. Down the line we go. Iran, quote, only 8 billion, only. But as we know, they're arming Russians, arming Hezbollah, arming Hamas, although that certainly has been weakened over the course of the last couple of years. It's amazing to me, though, if you look at India, I mean, as big as a power this is, this is their biggest rival here. Pakistan don't exactly like each other. Pakistan, $10 billion budget. India, $86 billion budget. India, 1 billion people. Pakistan, a couple 100 million. Still a huge country, Pakistan. It's obviously a hotspot. Bangladesh, $4 billion. Sri Lanka, $1 billion for the island. And then it's amazing here if you count up these slices here. Obviously, this is 10% of this pie, right? Even if you look at India, probably 15% of this pie. Latin America, the entire Latin American Caribbean, 73 billion, 48 for Southeast Asia, 37 for the islands, Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and all the other islands, and then 21 billion only for Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not going to say that I have solutions for all these things, but I wanted to, again, show you this pie chart because, firstly, because they're new numbers, and I'll use this in some of my other charts and analysis, but the world is going to continue to arm. In Europe, particularly, these numbers are not going down, going up to, whereas Germany was 1.1% 10 years ago in military spend. 1.1% of GDP. This is going to go up to 3, 4, 5%, depending on how the war in Ukraine ends. All right, so we've looked at now military spend versus GDP, okay, where the United States is even a larger share of military spend. Europe is larger than Asia. And the Middle East is a volatile place, of course, but it's also punching above its weight, as is Russia. Let's look at debt now. This is important to see how these things can be financed. Again, the United States is unique because they have the world's reserve currency. People typically want to hold dollars regardless. We'll see how long that lasts. We'll see how Bitcoin fares as a risk-free asset in the world. But here's, roughly 35 trillion in debt for 2024. United States, number one in the world again. America takes the cake, 34% of the pie. If you look at China, number two in debt and pretty high levels of indebtedness, not as high as the United States. Okay, so let's go back. Now, I don't necessarily like this debt to GDP. Firstly, because I don't actually think the multiples necessarily make sense. You can have so GDP is an income. It's a flow figure. Debt is a stock figure. All right, it's a liability, and you can have personal loans to your personal income that can be quite high. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but they can go up 5x, 10x, 30x. That's not a good thing to be up 30, 40x for sure. They say that it's very risky territory when you get over 100%. I am not saying it's a good thing to have a lot of debt. But I just don't necessarily like this number because I think it can go higher for a lot longer than one might think. And also, there are other factors in these economic relationships, such as military, that can influence this government debt picture for a long time, or perhaps longer than one thinks. So I just want to say that about debt to GDP. Anyway, the U.S. is at historically high levels, almost World War II levels, which were 140%. The U.S. is 121%. But China's rising. China is rising quick. All right, so 20 years ago, they were only 26% debt to GDP. Now they're 90. These bridges to nowhere, these ghost cities, there's a lot of problems in China. It's not like they're unstoppable, but of course they have their eye on Taiwan, which has very low debt. All right, there we go. Low debt to GDP, well lower than China. Of course, their GDP is high because of semiconductors. $200 billion in debt and a lot of allies around the world. It'll be a very interesting situation. Korea's a little bit elevated, but not as much as China. And then Japan. 250% debt to GDP. Only 20 points higher than it was 10 years ago. 80 points higher than it was 20 years ago. Just like the old Keynes quote that the markets can remain irrational longer than you can stay solvent, it's the same with debt, I think. A lot of people have expected Japan to default on this debt sooner. It simply doesn't. It just prints more money. It's the same. They actually set the template for the United States to do so 10 years later. Number three in the world, 10% of the pie of global debt. Number four economy in the world, I believe. Let's look at Japan. Number four economy in the world. So this stuff can go on a lot longer than we think. I'm not going to go through every one as I have military and GDP. There's also the interesting thing about whether a country has a good enough credit rating to get debt. So here's Russia, old Russia now, the green, Central and North Asia, very small levels of debt. So this is interesting because it could be good and bad. This is mostly reflecting like no one would want to hold rubles. All right, it's a garbage currency with a garbage government. But conversely, they're also not very indebted. So if they can find a partner, for perhaps China, to keep subsidizing them, theoretically, they're not that high levels of indebtedness, only 20% debt to GDP. But I'm not holding my breath here that that's a viable strategy. Because here, the currency starts to play a much bigger factor. How well can your currency hold up against um, other currencies? And if you looked at the ruble against the dollar for the last 25 years as Putin has been in power, it's gone nothing but down. And we have Europe, pretty high levels of indebtedness. UK, France, 112%, Italy, 136%. Germany is in Germany we trust now. It's because of the Weimar Republic fiasco. It's because of the very young democracy that devolved into Nazism in 1932. Germany has always been very, very cautious against holding a lot of debt, and that has generally impacted the ethos of the Eurozone, although, most countries still ignore Germany's warnings. Spain as well, 100% debt to GDP. Belgium, 100. Netherlands, pretty good. Poland, and now once you look at these smaller Eastern European countries, we don't have any debt either. Okay, so Hungary's actually got a bit, 73%, but if you look at Denmark's not much. Slovakia, let's look at, gotta find the Baltics. They're very, very small pieces of the pie here. Number 83 worldwide in debt. Lithuania, $30 billion, 38% debt to GDP. Luxembourg, actually quite small. Luxembourg has a lot of private debt, corporate debt, but government debt, no. And Latvia, only 45% debt to GDP, number 97 in the world. Estonia, where is it? 126th in the world, 9 billion in debt for Estonia. That's 20% of GDP. But these are small nations that are on the crossroads of east to west. And so there's a lot to worry about. Even though the economics of, say, an Estonia or Latvia, Lithuania look pretty good from debt levels, you count, or even Poland. You look at all these Eastern European countries, you can get all the way to Belgium, and it's basically a quarter of the total debt. 75% is held by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries. Count Belgium, 6 countries, whatever. 5, 6 countries hold 75% of the debt in Europe. But the economic output as well is extremely small. Let's go back to Europe. Again, I'm just focusing on Europe, obviously, because it's my neighborhood. It's the same thing. You got a little bit more action. So Germany, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to Belgium. You have 8 countries now that have 75% of GDP in Europe, Poland among them. But all these countries that have just relied on the United States security umbrella for decades, they're small countries. Austria is not in NATO. Switzerland's not in NATO coming up. Where the heck is Switzerland? Oh, there it is. Switzerland's a relatively big economy, banking economy, of course, but they're not in NATO. This is the problem with defending Europe against a large aggressor like Russia, is there's just might be decent economics for these small Eastern European countries that are free and transparent and have low levels of corruption and want to grow, which they all have benefited tremendously from the European Union. But without, the big four, big five to protect them, and historically the United States nuclear umbrella, things get pretty dicey pretty quickly. That's my main view, of course, as being an Eastern European, Northern European, American Latvian for the show here. But it's really the same for Norway, Denmark. Yeah, there's a lot of kit. They're a lot richer countries here, GDP-wise. Of course, they've been spending on their military for decades more than Eastern Europe. But it's the same story. I mean, how quickly did Luxembourg fall in May of 1940 to the Nazis? How quickly did Denmark and Holland and Belgium fall? They fell in a day. Not exactly a day, but it's all said and done a month, for sure a month. France fell as fast as Poland in World War II. France fell in a month. Poland fell in less than a month. And Poland was waiting on France and the UK to come rescue their eastern flank as the Nazis attacked them. This is pretty wild. It's pretty wild to me that, Germany is now the new power that's being invited into the Baltics. The United States wants to step away. Question is, will the United States step away? So I got a couple more slides here. Let's look over at this one. This is paraphrasing. This is a satire account. If you don't know Darth Putin, it's a great follow. Trump put out a tweet this weekend after the, again, just horrible, horrible bombing and droning that Ukrainians put up this weekend. He's paraphrasing this satire account. Trump said, Putin has just gone crazy. I used to know him, used to respect him, but he's gone crazy. He's a different person now. Okay? And all you have to do is look at pictures of Chechnya in the 90s. Of course, you look at the eastern territories of Ukraine. This is, of course, much worse and unfathomably worse in 2022, but completely taken to rubble some of these eastern Ukrainian towns even before 2022. And this is what's happening. So it seems that Trump, running the largest military in the world, is finally coming to his senses, as we have all been saying in Eastern Europe for forever, that the Russians can't be trusted and they have to be confronted. It seems that the bone-crushing sanctions, as Lindsey Graham has called them, will be allowed to go through the Senate. There's something like over 80 senators now that support it. It's beyond a veto from Trump, so they'll go through. But as Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was one of the largest oligarchs and oil producers and refiners in Russia in the 1990s and 2000, has said, and Putin, remember, jailed him for 10 years until the Sochi Olympics. He said that you cannot beat this aggressor with sanctions or with flowers. You cannot beat this aggressor with sanctions or with flowers, only on the battlefield. And the West, Ukraine is not even asking. I don't want to sound like it's, I'm talking down to anybody here, but you can donate. There are plenty of places to donate online. To Ukraine, you can donate in Bitcoin, but the West is not even being asked by Bitcoin. The West is not even being asked by Ukraine to have boots on the ground. It's only military support, and it's over 3 years now. Putin has failed to reach his objectives, but he's also not stopping. Trump thought he could stop him. He's not. All right, so it's just wild. I don't want to give up faith and hope in Americans, or at least the American administration, doing the right thing for democracies and countries under attack, but might have to be other countries. So Germany was again, really not the first step. Germans have been in Lithuania for 10 years, just like the Canadians have been in Latvia and the Brits have been in Estonia at more extended levels of troops, which are really still tripwire troops. I mean, 5,000 troops. Remember, you have roughly at the moment at any one time 400,000 Russians attacking 200,000 Ukrainians right now. So if Putin wants to direct his front towards the Baltics, that's a completely different scale than 5,000, permanent brigade in Lithuania. Nonetheless, this is real action that is certainly welcomed, and this is an entirely different time. Why is this all very difficult? It goes back to this chart, in my opinion. The U.S. finally got out of Vietnam around here, all right? And higher interest rates were a very difficult thing for the Americans during the Vietnam War. And it wasn't the only thing, of course. There were many, many factors. But higher interest rates pushed them out of that theater, all right, in the mid 70s. And then all of the inflation, the bad investments were completely flushed out by Paul Volcker here, taking interest rates to all-time highs. And then we're just on this period of 40 years. They called it the Great Moderation. Of course, we had the Iraq War, Afghanistan War, and a new quagmire that the Americans took on for 20 years, starting here, roughly. But all this time, interest rates are going down. It's more manageable. It's more manageable. When interest rates start to go up, things get dicey. And I'm really curious how the American people will feel about continuing to support Ukraine, even though they have these sanctions, even though they have, and Russia's not a big trading partner with the United States. So this idea of the secondary sanctions, which Trump calls a secondary tariff, because he doesn't want to use the word sanctions against his buddy Putin. I am worried how long it will last, how long the support can be kept up, because the 10-year is not doing what Trump wants it to do. It's going up. Where's our Liberation Day? Here? Right here? The 10-year did go down for a little bit, but then went right back up as the markets went down. We talked about this a lot. Markets were going down right there. 10-year was going up. It's kind of recovered now where the markets are up again, but the 10-year is still up. And as long as borrowing costs are there for companies that have a lot of debt, and the government itself has a lot of debt, things don't get easier for America. So Ukraine is in a very unenviable position because, the Americans aren't there for that sort of unwavering democratic support that at least the idea of America was there in Europe for the last 80 years. It's been said publicly now, Russia wants to put Belarus and Ukraine back together. They're stopping there. They're not saying the Baltics yet, even though the Baltics were illegally incorporated into the Soviet Union. Ask any of your government, if you're in Europe, ask any of your governments in Western Europe if they acknowledged the occupation of the Baltic states. Nobody did. Thankfully, the Baltics are in NATO and the European Union at the moment. But we have Belarus here, which, as I've shown you, is a micro-state economically. The Baltics have, each one of the Baltic countries is about the size of the economy as Belarus. Less than 10 million people. Ukraine has 40 million, although a lot have fled. Ukraine is literally fighting for the freedom of Europe at the moment, and Europe has been asleep. Finally, Europe is waking up. And the question is if Europe's going to have to do it alone. It seems that Europe's going to have to do it alone. So everything is topsy-turvy. Oh, this, by the way, was April 23 map. So now we have Sweden is blue now, too. Sweden is blue. Got into NATO as well after the Finns did. And both of these countries, which were neutral for a couple hundred years, as the Baltics were, by the way. The Baltics were neutral, and Poland was neutral during World War II, but we found ourselves on the wrong side of the Baltic Sea and the wrong side of Nazi Germany and Russia's aggression. If you want to find more people to follow or more videos to follow, this was a great one. I saw the Hoover Institution is wonderful, in my opinion. This is Czechia's President Pavel speaking with H.R. McMaster, former general, fellow at the Hoover Institution. It's a really good interview. Uh, Everybody gets it in Central and Eastern Europe, except for Hungary, of course, which is a corrupt autocracy for 15 years. But everybody gets it, what's happening to Ukraine. And I would just recommend it if you want more of a flavor here. This is a very good interview. Also here, Gary Kasparov. He's one of my favorite people when it comes to political commentary. He gets it. A genius, a chess prodigy, chess champion, one of the best chess players ever, and also a very bright political mind. He wrote a book in 2014 called Winter is Coming. That book, along with Karen Dashawa's book, Putin's Kleptocracy, will give you sort of a 0 to 60 flavor of why Russian aggression must be stopped on Ukrainian soil and pushed back to Russian soil, because they won't stop unless they are stopped. Gary Kasparov has been right about this for decades, as have the Baltics. But watch this interview with Charlie Sykes. You'll see more here. But if you come back to this idea, again, this is quoting a Trump tweet where he said Putin's gone crazy. I don't know what happened to him. He's basically trying to take the blame off of himself, or I wouldn't even say the blame. He's trying to take the heat off of himself for saying that he could end the war in 24 hours. Everybody none of this is surprising for the people in the Baltics. All right, none of this is surprising for Ukrainians. That Putin will not stop unless he is stopped. The value of life for Russians is held in very low regard compared to the rest of Europe, the rest of the civilized world, the rest of the world where there's actually the rule of law and markets. So let me put back one more. And again, I think this is important. Okay, so the military spend again, this is probably, in my opinion, this is even higher. They hide a lot of their military programs within like the sports ministry and the Ministry of Culture. Again, I'm not wasting my time to audit this stuff, but I'm glad that other people are tracking this. Supposedly the second largest army in the world, second greatest army in the world. They can't take Ukraine in their imperial conquest, but Ukraine still needs help. If the United States is going to have a leadership role, I do think Ukraine is going to be a part of the picture no matter what Trump wants to say. I'm pretty sure Trump is ready to just wash his hands of Ukraine, make it seem like he was trying his best, and walk away. I want to just show you this progression here. I update this every once in a while. I'm not a pollster. I don't really care about polls, but it is kind of interesting to see here. Zelensky, so we have Zelensky, Trump, and Russia. Okay, Zelensky's in the blue, Trump in the red, and basically Americans' opinion of Russia in the black. Zelensky went to a 90% approval rating back in 2022. You might remember how heroically he stayed, but also his cabinet and Ukraine, the Ukrainian people in general, staying and fighting Russia at 90% approval rating. After 2 hard years, this fell to 52% on the eve of Trump coming into power. Right, this was a low. It fell from 90% to 52%, and 2 brutal years of aggression against the Russian war machine. It increased 57% in February, and then after, so right about here, Trump starts to attack Zelensky. Again, everybody was saying there's going to be either one thing or of 2 possibilities that Trump's going to do. He's either going to take the carrot to Russia or the stick to Ukraine. He clearly went for the stick to Ukraine option. Actually, I shouldn't say that. That's the same option: the carrot to Russia, the stick to Ukraine. Or let's say the other option was, say you're going to go to Ukraine, cut off aid. That's the stick option to Ukraine, but also take the stick to Russia and say, all right, if you don't stop this war, I'm gonna give Ukraine max weapons. So it's a sort of this idea of basically giving each party the opposite information. But you can't continue that for long. And as we know, Putin chose the carrot option to Russia and the stick to Ukraine. Said Zelensky had a 4% approval rating. Said Zelensky started the war. Said Zelensky was a dictator. All just unbelievable flat out lies, just like saying that the U.S. has funded Ukraine to the tune of $300, $400, $500 billion. Zelensky's approval rating actually jumped in Ukraine, and it's jumped again in May 2025 to 74% again. Meanwhile, this is a pretty new one for Trump, 2025 May. His rating is low. I'm not saying this is a red flag or anything for Trump, but I do know that Trump cares about approval ratings. So I do hope that he sees this and understands that his Ukraine policy is definitely directly involved here. Americans want to help Ukraine. This isn't the best. I should probably use a different poll. Gallup only updates this in February. Maybe they'll do another one. Right when Trump was calling Putin back in February and getting belligerent against Ukraine, this is probably a MAGA bump. This from being an all-time low in 2024 February, a year and a half ago, it went up to 17%. This is sort of a MAGA bump, but this was in February. If you look at this today, I'm sure, and you can see it with other polls, I'm sure this is low again, almost back to 8%. Americans want to help Ukraine. I mean, it's a democracy fighting for its freedom. Just like America was helped in its revolution by France, by Poland, or Poles, I should say, individual Poles, and by France, and by Spain, and by Holland, so too Ukraine needs allies. So my hope is, but I don't see it happening, my hope is that he will finally read the writing on the wall that people want to help Ukraine. They want to stop Ukrainians from dying. And the only way that you can do that against a dictator is to stop them in their tracks. I think you're going to see these bone-crushing sanctions go through from Lindsey Graham and co. in the Senate, joining the European Union. But again, it's not going to be enough unless I've said it from the beginning. The easiest, the quickest thing they could have done, and this is where I think people on the right should understand that, you actually have a morally superior position to the Democrats, okay? Because Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden, these guys did not give enough for Ukraine to win. If you had done max weapons, max assistance from the beginning 3 years ago, or even in 2014, mind, because who was president in 2014? That was Obama. Republicans have a very morally sound position. And I'm speaking of just normal Republicans, not necessarily MAGA Republicans, but there's a morally sound position here that the center right or the right of American politics could have sat on. That, of course, just like in Kuwait in the early 90s, when a country is attacked, the sovereignty of their borders should be respected. Brett Stevens calls it the benign hegemon theory. I know a lot of people don't like this because they think that America is just the world's policeman. And if you talk about America invading sovereign borders like they did in Iraq, I would completely agree with you. But two wrongs don't make a right. It's just whataboutism. But I really hope that the Republicans and even the MAGA right people can start to see that, as always, the Baltics have been correct here. We know our neighbor. We understand the bloodshed that they are bringing to Ukrainians. And I just hope that they will help Ukraine at any cost push the invaders out of their land, or at least stop them in their tracks at the demarcation lines that have taken place since 2023 or so. Because Russia's not moving forward at the moment. They're just terrorizing Ukrainians with drone strikes. Thank you, Satoto. I really appreciate it. This is a little bit more of a macro one. I know everybody Thanks. Appreciate that one as well. That's what I'm trying to do. This is interesting. Was with some polls at a dinner yesterday. It's important to keep past history alive in order to appreciate how dicey things are today. Completely agree. The hardest thing for me, being a part of a country which is, the Baltics really are like, as they've called them, the Baltic Tigers or whatever, some economic miracles where we were just as low as Ukraine and Russia in 1991 when we were the first ones out of the Soviet Union. It can be done. I mean, freedom from autocracy, democracy, human rights, the rule of law. It can be done, pulling yourself away from a brutal dictator. And I think the Baltics are one of the best examples, collectively one of the best examples in the world of this happening. If we go back to this GDP, again, just in Europe, like Italy's, GDP per capita in 2024, 40,000. Estonia, I know we're so small here, but 101st largest economy in the world. 31,000, all right, GDP per capita, 3/4 of the size of Italy per capita. This country has 1 million people, and it was at the same level as Ukraine 30 years ago, 35 years ago. So it can be done, but this is Europe's problem, is just how disparate all of these states seem and they are, in different languages and different parliamentary structures. If you watch George Friedman, he likes to make this claim that there's no Europeans. There's only Germans, Brits, French, Italians. I think that's obviously prima facie true, but I don't believe that it has to be that way. And if you learn from history, I mean, you're only going to be stronger as a political, economic, and military union that is willing to share the same values. And yeah, you might not have the same united structure as the United States. And again, if I broke out California, New York, Florida, Texas, you'd see it would look exactly like Europe, that breakdown of a few large players and then a bunch of small ones. But it's just the United States has a united federal government and a wonderfully safe geographic location where they can, make some of the biggest decisions in any military, in any economy, in any economic area in the world, and do that relatively efficiently. Europe can't do that. China can do that. But that's Europe's problem. That's Europe's problem to overcome here. And I really do think, my Hungarian friends, please let me know if I'm missing this, but I have to keep refreshing here. It gets a little bit hung up. This is not a good sign for Hungary. You can talk all you want about nativism or nationalism or populism. The Hungarians are taking a lot of cash from Europe, from the European Union, and not contributing a lot and not growing a lot themselves. And again, I know some people in Hungary, great people. And it almost happened in Poland. All right, Poland, a much bigger economy, much bigger country, was almost going in the way of Hungary, and it's mostly, not always, but not all, I should say, but mostly because of the Ukraine war, that the Poles have come to the rescue of their brothers, of their former citizens in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, of which Ukraine was a huge part of it. And some Cossacks did have a vote. That changed Poland. So it's Poland and Ukraine and Germany. I mean, of course, the UK is always there and France is always there, but they just have to stay united in the face of this threat, in my opinion. And if you're an American wondering how to help and not, being as depressed as I have over the last couple months of just watching Trump tell lies about Zelensky and Ukraine, especially if you're a center right, traditional, I don't want to use the word libertarian or Republican or whatever, but just, someone who wants the rule of law, wants freedom and property rights. I mean, there's no better cause in the world right now than defending Ukraine. And you can do it individually. You can do it with Bitcoin. Again, I'm not obviously, I'm just my own little small channel here, but there's a lot bigger people around YouTube and Twitter that are, doing huge fundraisers for Ukraine. But I think what Ukraine has done is just heroic. I mean, look at the size of their military spend. They're the biggest army in Europe. It cannot be enveloped by Russia. If Ukraine is enveloped by Russia, then there's no choice but for me to, again, speaking as a very selfish act here, but I mean, there would be no choice for me to even stay in the Baltics. We'd be outmatched if Russia took over the Ukrainian army and then directed it towards the Baltics. They probably directed it at Moldova first, the old Soviet Romanian state, but they would come for the Baltics next. Numbers don't tell everything, but they tell a lot, right? It's amazing to me that a country with 140 million people, i.e. Russia, apparently the second greatest army in the world in 2022, could not take over a country that was, a fourth of its size or 1/5 of its size, really a fourth of its size. And its neighbor and everything else. And it's heroic what they've done. That picture is interesting too. Obviously the stuff is like, when you look at these big figures, this is like an oil tanker moving. It's very slow. It's not nimble. Things could change. It's a good and a bad thing that Russia doesn't have a lot of debt. Firstly, because they don't have the capacity to raise. But it's a bad thing because, that theoretically they could take on more. But I think they have larger problems as far as manpower, as far as infrastructure. I mean, you read every winter that Russian infrastructure is crumbling. People are suffering. And you see these pictures of entire apartment buildings that are just frozen, literally frozen on the inside. Why this country just doesn't want to go home and take care of its own is beyond me. They just have this continual expansionist, aggressive stance towards their neighbor when no one of these countries in Europe wants to invade them. Not one. It's mostly all I had for this one, guys. More global, more macro. We'll get back to Ukraine. I'm sorry. I'm either doing Freudian slips or what. I don't know. But they're both good things in my mind. Bitcoin and Ukraine. I keep thinking about Bitcoin and Ukraine. We'll get back to more Bitcoin tomorrow. Something that's great to hold in any geopolitical situation. But this one with Ukraine, I think, is very important, and it shows how much Ukraine has done, in my opinion, for Europe and what they will continue to do. Where's Ukraine on the debt scale? Yeah, so 176 billion. Aid does not count. Aid does not count. I need to throw up the old chart of the Weimar Republic. The debt that they had after World War II was huge. It was unbelievably large, something like $30 billion at the time, which was, that's hundreds of billions today. But it's pretty incredible to see these figures. Like I said, I thought this would even be higher when it was published, but they're going to continue to grow this, and everybody's going to continue to grow this. This figure's about 2 trillion, by the way, so you're roughly still at this 2%, a little bit under figure as far as military worldwide. All of these costs, if you added them up, is about $2 trillion. All of this GDP, all of this, all right, so here's the military spend. That's how the pie looks. Let's go to GDP. That's how the pie looks. All of this is close to $110 trillion in 2024. So you're under 2%, a global military budget or expenditure per GDP. That's how it looks worldwide. Unless there's no more questions, I'm going to leave it here for today, guys. We'll come back to this. And now that these 2024 figures are updated, it will help with some other charts that I have, which I like to compare with other countries, and kind of can help as far as looking at the growth of certain things, even the growth of maybe even something like Bitcoin. So. Thank you, Sandro. That's all I'm trying to do. I know mostly people in the Bitcoin space are anti-government, which certainly I fully understand in many ways. But when you have one government killing innocent civilians in another country, I don't really know how else you can look at this. And as everybody knows, we're pretty exposed to it in the Baltics here. So we're on the not the front lines, but the next line. And if Ukraine loses, it's very, very bad for us. Thank you, Forbidden Man. Thank you. All right, guys, let me know if you like that or if you want like to see other charts like this. But I think this is a good way to kind of get the lay of the land and see how things could develop in the future. The big thing I wanted to show you is that Europe is very fragmented, very, very fragmented. But Ukraine is now as big a player as any in Europe, and Germany is back. is back. So let's see how that goes. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.